Well, hello, slingers. Welcome back to another week of the Wordslinger Podcast. And I've got a fun one this time because it's a topic that I really enjoy and something that I've thought about. So maybe you've thought about it too. Whether you're a writer or whether you're just somebody who's done something interesting in your life and you want to talk about it, this one's for you. So stick around.
It's the Wordslinger Podcast, where story matters. Build your brand, write your book, redefine who you are. It's all about the story here. What's yours? Now, here's the guy who invented pants optional, Kevin Tomlinson, the Wordslinger.
Wordslinger.
Well, I am Kevin Tomlinson, the Wordslinger, and I am happy to have you here. I'm really thrilled about this episode because memoir writing is something that I am kind of obsessed with. I have read a lot of memoirs in my career, in my life, and there's just something about it. There's something about it as a craft. I think it takes a very special skill to sort of take elements from your real life, real experience, and rather than just reporting them like you would in a sort of journal or something like that, taking those and finding themes in it, finding the story in it. That's the sort of heart of the craft of memoir writing, and it's something that, you know, I don't know. I love reading memoirs. I've thought about writing a memoir. I think what holds me back is I kind of worry that I don't have anything interesting enough to talk about on the page, but I'm finding that's not true. And, my guest today really would probably yell at me for making a claim like that. But I'm talking to Wendy Dale today. You're going to love this interview. Wendy, she's got a whole program for helping you kind of learn and master the craft of writing a memoir. She's got this program called Memoir Writing for Geniuses. I like that she called it For Geniuses. We talk about this a little bit in the interview, but everything's always aimed at writing for dummies, writing for idiots, writing for imbeciles. And you know what? I don't even want to briefly think of myself in any of those categories. So call me a genius and you've won my heart for life. So anyway, we're going to jump right into this interview. Make sure you stick around afterwards for the note at the end and enjoy this chat with Wendy Dale. Well, I'm glad that, for those of you tuning into the podcast, you stuck around through the intro, which means I did a good job of setting up today's guest. I'm talking to Wendy Dale. She's the founder of Memoir Writing for Geniuses. Wendy, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Memoir
By the way,
writing.
memoir writing for I already cut
Go
you
ahead.
off. Memoir writing for geniuses it's kind of sarcastic, right? It came.
Yeah.
Some people write to me and they say, "Well, I don't know if I am a genius. I don't know if you want to work with me." It's really sarcastic. It comes from Memoir Writing for Dummies. So
Yeah.
we want to be the opposite.
I thought finally somebody's writing a book and creating an organization for me is what I felt. So I was
it
excited
is for you,
about it.
Kevin.
Okay,
good.
I'm a little tired, and you may be feeling the same way since you named it this way. But like, I'm kind of tired of references labeling me an idiot or a dummy.
Right? Yeah.
Like,
Genius.
Right, genius. When are we going to start just saying, here's instructions for stupid people, and just pull the Band-Aid off altogether.
Right.
So I got to tell you, I'm really interested in this because memoir writing is something that I've always had an interest in. And I do a form, I think, you'll have to let me know, but I do a form of memoir writing when I'm doing my sort of weekly blog / newsletter. I write these essays that are generally segments of my life, maybe not strictly memoir all the time, but it's a way for me I share a lot about my past and my upbringing and my experiences. And so is that kind of in line? Would you consider that memoir at all?
I think the prose is really similar, right?
Yeah.
So you're writing about your life. One
Yeah.
of one of the confusions, people come to me and they're confused about the difference between autobiography and memoir. And there really is a difference. Autobiography is usually written by a famous person, and it's usually the history of that famous person's life. Because if we're talking about a celebrity, oh, what did the celebrity live through? We want to know about their life.
Yeah.
When you're not a famous person, you really need an idea driving your memoir, what I call a premise. So there has to be a story. So you're onto something with your blog postings. At some point, you could turn those into a memoir, but you would need to have a lens through which to tell your story. So what I
Oh,
tell my students is a bunch of random stories is the opposite of plot. So
okay.
what you need to do, so the challenge I have been working with people is taking these random stories and connecting them in some way. So
Okay.
if you connect your blog postings, so it is really fulfilling to write memoir. I'd be interested to know how it feels different for you than writing fiction, because you're a fiction writer.
Yeah.
But so that is the challenge for memoir writers, creating plot, which as a fiction writer, you kind of do intuitively, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
write a novel without plot. So
That's true.
tell me how it feels different. Do
Yeah.
you enjoy
Well, I'd
writing?
say this. So I'm guessing then that that means that if the only string keeping
Mhm.
those stories together is you, then it's biography. So you have to have a theme or plot that ties it all together for it to be memoir. Am I kind of getting the right gist there?
Well, so memoir usually is from a period in your life, or it
Okay.
can be from your entire life told through a certain lens.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to talk about your obsession with archaeology,
Yeah.
that would be throughout your whole life. That also is a memoir. So you're not telling me about what your high school was
I
like.
see.
You're not telling me about prom
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
college and right. But so a lens, you need a story idea. And that
Yeah.
really helps. It's similar to what you start with plot for a
Right.
fiction. So with
Yeah.
memoir, you start with a premise. So
I
what would
th-
your memoir be?
I like that. I don't know. What would it be? I
Uh,
think so. If I'm hearing that right, then you could do multiple memoirs. Then you wouldn't have to because you're exploring different themes, right? Or is that
Exactly.
taboo? Okay,
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly what you should
I
do.
like
If you
that.
try and cram it, yeah, you try and cram it all into one book,
Yeah,
it's overwhelming to it's a lot. I mean, a lot happens. I tell the people I work with, the simpler your plot, counterintuitively enough, usually the better your story is. Memoir
yeah,
is a bit more dependent on the writing itself than the plot. You're a
yeah,
plot guy, right? You write
yeah. I'm a
thrillers.
plot guy. That's right. And
So
and
you
I,
might have a
I could
great
see
plot.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you already hit on one. Like I have a great interest in archaeology, which is a topic I explore a lot in fiction. So yeah, I could totally see like that would work for me actually as a sort of I think my readers would be interested in that because it would be the origins of why I created these characters and why I explore these topics. Is that
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes, super.
that's
Or
cool.
traveling as a writer too, right?
Yes,
So
yeah,
what the traveling writer's life. That'd be a
yeah.
great memoir.
I tell you, that's the thing whenever I think about memoir writing, it's travel writing that I think of the most. Do you think that's like the most popular form of memoir is the travel memoir?
I took a deep sigh, right? Because I'm a travel writer, right? So,
Yes.
and I took a deep sigh because travel narratives are tougher to sell.
Yeah.
And really they're tougher to sell because there usually isn't a search. Usually they fall into when memoir doesn't work, it's just a bunch of stuff that happened to the person who's writing it. And that gets boring. You can see how so travel writing can really fall into this trap really easily of it not really being about anything. So just
Yeah.
moving to a foreign place isn't really a story. So I teach people techniques to take all of these things that happened to you in Paris and to
Hmm.
turn those disconnected things into a story. Think about back in, I think, the 60s, the 70s, when people would invite their neighbors over and they would force them to watch slideshows of their
Yeah.
vacations,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and here's Uncle John, and here's Tammy getting wet in the beach, and here, and it's all, and everyone hated this. It was
Yeah.
so boring hearing about someone's vacation. So I love travel writing, but when it's done right.
Yeah.
And when it's done right, it's not a bunch of stuff that you lived through. You actually are creating plot out of these disconnected events that happen to you. So that's
Yeah.
really the challenge. When done right, it's great.
Yeah. I had no idea that travel writing was a hard sell. I always thought that was very popular. Like that's what people
Yeah,
wanted.
it is. It actually is tough to sell. In fact, sometimes it's better to market it as memoir
Mm.
with a travel component as opposed to travel narrative, right? There's that travel narrative section in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Memoir tends to sell better. So I actually
Interesting.
recommend that people pitch their book as a memoir with a travel component instead of a travel narrative.
What about people who, all right, so because I have traveled quite a bit in my life and because I've had some interesting experiences. Like I've got topics that I can talk about, but I don't necessarily know that they're going to be interesting when strung together. Like, so what's the secret there for finding that plot? Like, how do I mine that out of just a cascade of personal experiences?
Do you know, I do something that I don't think other coaches do. And I suggest to people that you actually start with a list of your favorite stories, that you
Okay.
start there. And then you figure out as a secondary step how to connect them to create plot. So that way you're always telling the most interesting things. The danger, I was talking about a memoir needs a premise, right? So there's this idea, there's archaeology, my obsession with archaeology.
Yeah.
Well, some of those stories are really boring.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm guessing. Sorry to
No,
Kevin,
all of
sorry,
mine are
but just,
Indiana Jones level exciting. Every one
oh, they are.
of them.
Well, in order to create, I mean, there are those stories about, I don't know, maybe this class you took in college, and some of them are less exciting than others. So that's the danger of working with a premise. So what I tell people is you start with this premise, but then you think in terms of these chapters. And within the chapter, you're not so hard on yourself. It doesn't have to be everything related to archaeology because it might be
Mhm.
a really boring book. So you come up with your favorite stories that occurred at the time. And as a second, so you start with, so you have really good stories. You start with these scenes, and then you figure out how to connect them later. And
Yeah.
connecting them can sometimes be as simple as putting something at stake. If you're in search of something, if you want to learn, I don't give me an archaeology example, Kevin. What
Oh
give
gosh.
me a time period. Yeah.
Let's
What would
say,
chapter one be?
oh man, see now I'm as a novelist, I'm wired to open on action. So
You
I
are,
would want to
yes, yes.
open the memoir same way, I assume. So it would
Oh,
be something like, maybe being trapped, the time I found myself lost and trapped in a cave in a cavern system,
ooh.
you know.
Okay, you
But
have
then,
good.
and
Oh, see,
I'd
sounds
want to hold
great.
the
Yeah.
suspense on that, like
Uh-huh.
maybe even imply that I didn't get out, even though they know clearly I got out because I wrote
Right.
the book. But yeah,
That is a great beginning. That's what, yeah, absolutely. Starting with that hook, what I call a suspense scene and leaving us in suspense, not
yeah,
finishing
yeah,
it. And then we start at the chronological beginning,
yeah.
right? So you start with that suspense scene. Oh, I love it. That sounds great.
There you go. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. I'm getting into this now. All right. So what
Yeah.
happens if you don't have experiences like that? You've never been in a cave. You've never explored anything interesting. So, where's the line on I'm just going to write a boring biography of myself and I've got content worthy of a memoir.
A lot of it really is in the writing. I mean, I get I work with so many people and they're kind of everyday stories.
Yeah.
But well, I have both extremes. I have, people who've grown up with famous parents and people who have quite everyday lives. And the quality of the writing makes a big difference. It
Yeah.
really does. So we can relate. What you want to do when someone's reading your memoir is you want them to relate to you. You want
Yeah.
them, even if you grew up with famous parents, and I didn't, right? So when I read a book about growing up with famous parents, I relate to the relationship between mom and dad, between mother and daughter, right? So you're always finding something to relate to. Now, if it's an everyday memoir, and the writing is really good, I can also be completely pulled in. So I tell people that if your reader's emotionally affected, they're never bored. So
Yeah.
that really is the goal. So it doesn't, to affect someone emotionally, you don't have to get lost in a cave
Yeah.
in Turkey or I don't know where you were.
Yeah.
You're in Turkey.
Who
It's
told you it was
yes.
Turkey? How did you know this? Where have you been
Oh, I
spying
totally
on
made
me?
that up. I totally made that up. Uh, I don't know. You just look like the kind of guy who hangs out in caves in
Yeah.
Turkey, Kevin. I don't know.
I like that. All right, good. Yeah. That's my big worry is that you know, even I've got some pretty interesting stories, but that happened in my actual real personal life. But just because they're not always connected, and they're not always there's not a lot of them, right? There may not always. I don't.
Hmm.
I want to know, like, if I just have an everyday life. Am I
Mhm.
still able to be a memoirist? Can I, if my biggest adventures are things, meals that I prepare for my family or something like that, like, is there a memoir in that kind of content?
Actually, if you love preparing meals, like if
Yeah.
preparing meals, and that passion is there,
Yeah. Okay.
and also if there's a story that changes over time, right? So that is important. One of the problems that I see people, and I used to do this too, I think every mistake that I see memoir writers make, I've made myself, right? They're only so, I mean, it's really counterintuitive the way you write a memoir. It really is. The way you think about your life and the way
Yeah.
you create plot are two different things. So that's what I'm always up against and always trying to help people fix. But so you need plot in some way. There needs to be some change. Things need to happen.
Hmm.
So the error I see people make is they describe their life.
Yeah.
So they would describe their passion for food. They would describe Sunday dinners at their house. They would describe, whereas plot starts, as a fiction writer, you would know this intuitively. One day, as I sit down to dinner, a big plate of spaghetti and meatballs. So now something needs to happen. Plot
Yeah.
begins with things happening. Again, as a fiction writer, you would never write a scene in which something didn't happen.
Right.
But memoir writers do it all the time. They do
Yeah.
it all the time because they remember their life. And they're like, well, so I remember the taste of the spaghetti and meatballs. And I remember my brother-in-law knocked on the door and my son, so it's either nothing happens or so much is happening that we kind of, the scene doesn't have a reason to exist.
Yeah.
So your challenge, you can write a book about your love of food, making dinner for the family every single night. Absolutely. But what you don't want to do is describe what dinners were like. You want
Yeah.
to make sure there's plots. One Sunday night, my son spills spaghetti all over himself. Then, something happened. So that is the beginning of creating plot. So that
Yeah.
is one of the
Yeah.
biggest mistakes I see memoir writers make. They
Yeah.
describe their life in general.
There's a kind of I'm not going to say it's a rule, but there's like a process you can go through as a novelist where to know whether your story is a story. There's this idea of if you can
Hmm.
follow the
Hmm.
whatever you just wrote with, and then this happened, then you're off track. But if you can say, because of that, this happened,
Yeah.
now you're telling a
Yeah.
story. So maybe it feels like it's the same sort of thing for the memoir.
It
Yeah.
really is the same thing. You get there in a different way,
Yeah.
right? So I So as a fiction writer, I tell people the difference between fiction and memoir. It's as a fiction writer, you're almost an oil painter, right?
Okay.
So you have this blank canvas and you just create what's necessary. You're
Yeah.
creating this work of art. What's left over is only what was needed. The opposite is true with memoir. You have so much, and this is another reason memoir writing is so challenging. You have so much information. You have your whole life. You have all of these stories. So you're a sculptor. You're starting with this chunk of marble, and you need to scrape away. You have all the information until what is left over is a great story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sort of like telling the story with negative space, right? Like you're eliminating the
Exactly.
stuff that doesn't move the
Yeah.
story forward. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so we okay. In terms of plot, we know that that is a crossover for fiction writers. Are there other methods or techniques or tactics or things that cross over between the world of fiction and memoir writing?
I think I think a really good memoir should feel very much like a novel,
Okay.
but getting there is different. So I think you need some change between the narrator from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, emotional change. Something has to be at stake. I
Hmm.
mean, they're in search of something. Usually I tell people conflict, plays a huge role in fiction. A narrative want can serve the same purpose in memoir. So if the narrator, it's more common. So it serves the same purpose. There's a conflict. In your books, they're in search of an artifact, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there's a search there. That's a narrative want. They want to find something. So it can work that way in memoir. Something needs to be at stake, but just wanting to achieve something can actually create that sense of suspense in
Yeah.
memoir. So they're very similar, but the way you get there in memoir again is kind of different because people think of their lives in a different way than
Hmm.
plot, right? And so one of my big challenges is people think that what they remember happening to them is a story. And it's really
Right.
not. It's what
Right.
happened to
Yeah.
them. That's what I tell them it's diary style writing. No one wants to read your diary. You want to read your diary, or maybe your spouse wants to read your diary, but
No.
strangers.
Even I don't want to read my diary. It's purely reference material. Uh, so yeah, I'm fascinated by this whole thing, by the way, and because now I want to shift gears a little though, because
Okay.
I want to talk about you've written the memoir now, right? And let's say that you've managed to figure out how to make it a story, managed to figure out how to make it engaging. So now you want to actually publish that memoir. Um, what's the secret here? Because my take on this has been that once an agent or a publisher learns that it's a memoir, their eyes kind of glaze over and they're not all that interested. So, how are we making this something attractive for that group?
Okay, so deep sigh here.
Ah,
Come from traditional publishing. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I traditional publishing, but 20 years ago, right?
Hmm.
So I got a memoir published 20 years ago, and I have seen the industry change a lot. And at
Yeah.
first I got mad. I'm like, it's so unfair, and it's even harder to earn a living as a writer. And then I started to really try and understand what was happening. And what is happening in publishing right now is, Amazon has made life difficult for traditional publishers. It really has. And I have really come around to self-publishing for many reasons.
Yeah.
I come from traditional publishing, but I am not seeing traditional publishers do right by their authors. The other
Yeah.
thing I'm seeing is the quality of books is going down because traditional publishers are so scared. They're so scared. Publishing was never a great business model anyway, right?
Right.
It was, they publish, I don't know the numbers, 10 books. And of these 10 books, one of them is going to be a bestseller. 9 of them are going to be at a loss And that one bestseller is going to pay for those 9 books that didn't make any money.
Right.
It's a terrible business model,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
now it's worse. I mean, it really is. Now,
Yeah.
and they don't know which of the 10 books is going to be the bestseller. So everything is just a risk in publishing. With Amazon, with technology, with the internet, books have changed. People read fewer. I mean, it's really dire for traditional publishing. It really
Yeah.
is. So what is happening in traditional publishing is they're even more risk averse. And so they're publishing books from celebrities.
Yeah.
So I get a lot agents. The first question that they're asking people is, how many followers do you have?
Yeah.
Not what is your book about? And
Yeah.
that frustrates me as a writer. We write, I don't know, you don't want to spend all day on social media. You're a writer. If you do that, you'll never write. So that's what I've seen happening in traditional publishing is that's the first question they ask you. So
Right.
I really have seen I've seen people have success. And some of my writers are with traditional publishing. I do have some who have made it work. But I think that self-publishing really is an option nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do. I think
I
it's a
mean,
good option for writers too. It's not
right.
even, 15 years ago, you had to pull my leg. No, I come from traditional publishing, but I'm seeing it as kind of an outdated business, to be honest with you. That's not really
Yeah.
good to writers.
No, you're preaching to the choir here. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been the voice of indie publishing for the past decade. So I get that. I guess here's my prejudice shining through, Wendy, because I immediately when I think of memoir, I think there's no market for it in self-publishing. But you're saying you're
Oh,
seeing
it's the
success.
opposite.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah, it
interesting.
really is. One thing people do is they look for, and I think this is limiting, but it's one option. People look for people who have similar experiences. So if you're
Uh-huh.
writing a book about abuse, childhood abuse, you search for groups of people who have similar experiences. No, I mean, it's not a terrible idea, right? So you are going to reach that group of people because they're interested in your subject matter.
Right.
But I just love memoir. Like I think that I like reading about lives that are not like my own. And so, you do need to find a way to publicize your book. That's a challenge for everyone in self-publishing. But
Hmm.
I've seen people have success with it. I really have. I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
So,
That is exciting. It's exciting because I hadn't considered that as a self-publishing avenue. You know, I self-publish all my books right now. I've got some
right.
traditional stuff kind of in the mix, but
Uh-huh.
this idea of writing a memoir is something that appeals to me. So I assume it's going to appeal to a lot of my audience. But I always assumed if I did that, that I'd have to do a full court press to get it with a traditional publisher. And that's, it's challenging enough to get fiction published that way, but something like this where it's a very personal story or it might feel like a personal story felt like it might be a little daunting.
Yeah.
So good to
No,
hear.
I think self-publishing is great. Yeah, absolutely. When I see memoirs that don't do well, that are
Mhm.
self-published, it's really because they're lacking that plot. So
Yeah.
it can be really tempting to feel like your book is done and put it out in the world, and it's a bunch of memories from your life. You
Hmm.
don't have that plot. So that's really, and I'm an expert in this because I was terrible at it. I was that person. The very first time I wrote a memoir, I sent it out to agents, this was 20 years ago, and I heard crickets. And I'm, publishing, they just don't appreciate good literature, all these things you tell yourself. And I finally did get an agent to sign me, and she said, you have this really strong narrative voice. You know nothing about structure.
Hmm.
And I honestly remember, and so it's really not intuitive. I remember the thoughts that went through my head, and I went, what is the structure thing she's talking about? I had never heard the word. So obviously she was totally right. And it's kind of become this obsession for me, because I suffered a lot from not understanding structure and
Yeah.
eventually got her help to rewrite this book. But I just see so many people, structure is just so counterintuitive. It's
Yeah.
not, it really is. It's the opposite of what you think you should do. You think you're writing about your life, and you're really not. You're taking true stories from your life and you're finding plot in that, which is a very different
Yeah.
way to think about a book.
You're telling the story of a character who just happens to share your name and history, right?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
They're Kevin Tomlinson.
The other
Yes.
Kevin
Yeah.
Tomlinson, which is, by the way, the title of my memoir.
I love it.
Or will be if I get around to writing. That's a no. I like that because what I'm learning from you on this is that there's a sort of dual benefit that can happen here. So if you are a fiction writer interested in memoir, or it actually would benefit you as a fiction writer to train, learn, take courses, take your courses, and learn how to write memoir. But I think the opposite is also true, right? So if you want to write memoir, it would benefit you to go and take maybe some creative writing courses. Is that about the gist of what you're thinking?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think they again, a memoir should feel very similar to a
Yeah.
novel by the time someone's finished reading. I should feel like I'm reading this great story.
Yeah.
The other thing is the prose is really the same, right?
Yeah.
Now memoir tends to be a little bit more on the literary
I was
side
going to ask,
because,
is it more
yeah,
literary? Yeah.
it is because I think there's a continuum. You have plot and like and sort of emotional prose, right?
Yeah.
So this, I don't like the word flowery. I don't like this pretentious prose. I
Yeah.
don't, that there's a difference between, this prose that's beautifully written and pretentious prose. So forget pretentious and super flowery, but there is kind of this more literary.
Yeah.
With a thriller, I've read your prose. You actually do have this nice emotional tone to your writing. Some thriller writers don't,
Yeah.
right? And I actually find them really boring.
Yeah.
But you
Me
do.
too.
You have some
Yeah.
emotion. You do. You transport me emotionally. So memoir is more literary in that I think the more you transport someone emotionally with your prose, the
Hmm.
less plot you need. Right. And because
Oh,
of
okay.
memoir,
Interesting.
yeah, because
Mhm.
you're affecting someone emotionally. So you don't need these twists and turns all the time.
Yeah.
So you probably have great plot in your memoir, but you don't need as much. You need for things to happen and for those things to be related in some way. So I
Yeah.
understand, wait, why are you telling me about your brother-in-law when we were just talking about your daughter's prom? Like, wait, what? And, I mean, people do that.
Yeah.
They tell me they remember their life on the page. So that
Yeah.
doesn't really work.
Are there
But when it comes
things?
to, yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, finish your thought.
oh no, the prose is really similar. So there is a lot of crossover. The
Hmm.
prose is the same, but it tends to be more literary.
Yeah.
You don't need as much plot when you're affecting someone emotionally with your prose. I think I'm repeating myself.
No, I get you.
Yes.
No, I feel you. Sometimes you got to repeat ideas sometimes for them to sink in with me. Okay, so you're on the right
Oh,
track.
okay, good.
Uh, yeah, I've completely blown out of my head what I was about to ask you, but that's okay. We'll move on. Because I actually here's what it was. Is there a line? Because one of the things, so like when I'm talking to writers about things like, their newsletter and their blogs and things, there's an idea that I push called, that you want to be personable, not personal in your newsletters, right? So you want to share things about your life, but you don't want to go into in-depth detail about your personal, life, but you want to be
Uh-huh.
approachable and be able to engage with them from that personal level. What's the line when it comes to memoir? Like what would you say is just off? Is there something that's off limits? Or, how much detail should someone share? How personal should they get in this writing?
Quite personal. Now
Yeah.
let me qualify that. The
Okay.
writing itself should be really personal.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean some memoir coaches are like, write about what hurt you the most and what you're most ashamed of. And I really don't feel like you have to get it all out there.
Right.
So you have to make that decision of what you want to share with the world, the things that you lived through.
Yeah.
Having said that, one of my challenges is when I work with journalists. Journalists love being objective, just the facts, ma'am.
Right.
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 And so that doesn't work very well for memoir. Just telling me a bunch of stuff that you did, a bunch of stuff that happened to you, even if you have plot. So now we're
Yeah.
talking about the prose itself. If it's too objective, it's actually not interesting. It's not emotionally affecting. So journalists are tough for me because they've been trained, just be
Yeah.
factual. And memoir really needs this emotional component. So I tell people, put me inside your head.
Yeah.
And I've looked at your prose and you do that as well. It's not your head, it's
I
your
appreciate
character's
that.
heads,
Yeah.
right? But absolutely that it's like we're reading their thoughts.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that in memoir, it's just about who cares, right? You haven't
Right.
affected me emotionally. I visualize it. So I tell my writers too, memoir is not a visual experience, it's an emotional one. So
Yeah.
yes, I want to see what's happening, but so many people err on the side of just describing everything happening, and I don't feel like I'm there.
Yeah.
I don't understand what it feels like to be in this situation.
See, that's why I both got in trouble and won awards as a journalist, because I always ended up writing
Oh,
I wanted to write the emotional story, not the straight facts. So that's why
excellent.
I didn't
Yeah.
succeed as a beat reporter, but I did do pretty well once I
Well,
got into more of an editorial. So
excellent. Good.
uh
Well, then you'll probably be a great memoir writer.
I hope so. I'm going to give it a shot. You've
Yeah.
inspired me. This is something I've thought about quite a bit over the years. I remember I was at a conference. I was speaking at a conference in San Francisco, and was really irritated that they had put me up against this I can't even remember who it was, even though they were very famous, popular memoirist, who was going to talk
Okay.
about the art and craft of writing memoir. And then I was lucky enough to that they sort of rescheduled slightly, and that one kind of overlapped instead of just flat out, um, going against me. And I was able to tag in for like the last 5 minutes. And so I was so fascinated by everything that this person was saying that I immediately started writing a memoir and just spun out. So I'm gonna have
Happened.
to.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you know how it is. I tried to put everything. I tried to do what you warned us against. I tried to give every detail of
Yeah.
my life from this period to this period, and it was a laundry list. It wasn't a memoir. It wasn't a
Yeah.
story. So lessons learned.
So one thing I tell people is, yeah, in order to create a story,
Yeah,
one of the first questions you should ask yourself is what happened?
yeah,
And that helps you get out of this tendency to describe Sunday night dinners, to describe what what it feels like to make pasta carbonara.
yeah.
Right? So what happens? And I really force them, and they really struggle with this. They really do. But I force them to say, okay, you have to give me a day, one day. Okay, it starts with
Mhm.
one day, and forcing yourself to say one day something happens. It's a little different than saying dinners at our house, right?
Yeah,
That's not plot. That's a description of your life, but plot starts on one day, a
yeah,
certain point in time. And so okay, one day this happens. And so we start with actually coming up with lists. What are these things that happen? And that really, it's a huge step forward that might help you in writing your memoir, what happens. And as a novelist, that should be kind of intuitive for you.
yeah,
But memoir is just this tough beast. The way we think of our lives and the way we create plot is so different. So it starts with what happens. You're
yeah,
you're halfway there if you can do that.
yeah. All right. What happens, and then why it matters, right? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna knock
Okay.
it out. All right. Well, we're at time, so I gotta wrap us up. But I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's gonna go in my memoir once I've
Oh
written it.
no.
See, that's what you got to be careful about with this sort of thing.
Right?
I'm gonna get that T-shirt. I'm gonna put you in my memoir. But thank you for Wendy for being a guest on the show. Tell people where they can find you and your work and what you're doing.
If you want to find more, sign up. We have a free 7-part memoir class, and just go to freememoirclass.com.
Okay.
My name's Wendy Dale. You can Google me, but freememoirclass.com, and that's a gateway into anything else you want to know about memoir
Okay.
writing for
All right.
geniuses.
And I see, but from your bio, they can also find you at geniusmemoirwriting.com.
Absolutely. And I have a book coming out. By the time the podcast comes out, it might be out already. It's called The Memoir Engineering System. So
Oh, excellent.
lots of information on how to structure your memoir.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to have to pick up a copy of that. So, all right.
Good.
Well, great. All right, Wendy, thank you so much. And for everybody tuning in right now, thank you for being here. Because without you, I mean, we're just two people randomly talking to each other out of the blue. But if you'll stick around, I bet I've got something interesting to say after this, and it's going to be part of my memoir. So stick around, stay tuned, and we'll see you on the other side. Well, thank you for sticking around to the very end. This is something I like to do with every podcast, so I hope you're getting something out of this final word here. A note at the end. I wanted to say something real quick because I haven't officially referred to it as this before. I've started doing it recently in this sort of little. You probably saw the text slide by on the screen there, but in every one of my books, there's an afterword from me, a note from the author, and I started calling it a note at the end almost a decade ago. I used to call it stuff at the end of the book, which was fun, but as the tone of my books became a little more serious, I guess, that didn't work as well. But a note at the end works well for me, has certain connotations to it. There's an elegance to it. And I even wrote, and I don't have a copy nearby, but I have a book called A Note from the Author. I've kind of joked, and maybe someone will follow through on this. Like, if I ever die and they write a biography about my life, they can call it A Note at the End. Maybe that's what I'll call my autobiography or my memoir, but possibly not. I think that's more of a biography than a memoir. This concept of memoir writing is something that sticks around for me. Now, Wendy kind of shot down my pitch of the blog that I write being a sort of memoir. I can see why. Based on our conversation, I can kind of see where that's coming from. I guess it's more essay style than memoir. I think there's some crossover between the two, but I'm not the expert. But there's something about this concept of, there are events, there are things that have happened in your life that, if you frame them in the right way, they become story. The element of story is something that it can't be overlooked. As a novelist, that's kind of the whole point of writing. If I'm writing, say, a nonfiction book, story may not play a role in it, I guess. I can think of instances, I suppose. A technical manual probably isn't telling a story. A how-to guide may not be telling a story. I think that both of those could benefit from story, though. So I think the story is just a powerful tool that sometimes people don't recognize and don't realize can be used in ways that maybe they never considered. Memoir writing for me is kind of an approach to that idea, to take the power of story and apply it to these sort of mundane events of your life. We brought up the example of cooking in this interview. So, and that's on my mind because I'm watching a lot of cooking related shows and documentaries and things. I've been watching The Bear. I'm caught up, by the way. It's an excellent show. I can't wait for the next season of that. But if you were just a home cook, I could see a memoir about the experience of growing up in a household where maybe someone in your family was a cook, taught you those skills, but look at how you could fold those things together in a story with a theme. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking about the experiences I had with my grandmother when I was growing up. My mom as well, but I lived with my mother until maybe 8 years old or so, and then I ended up living with my grandparents until adulthood. And cooking was this thing that was ever present in our lives, right? So I could relate the experiences I had with my family cooking, teaching me how to cook, the way we handled food, the way we handled meals, getting together. Did we sit around a table for a while? And then for a while we didn't. It was always TV trays in front of the TV set or whatever. But then we would have those occasions like Thanksgiving, for example, or just some sort of family get together. And everyone would bring a dish, and everyone had their specialty. And there were just, the variety of textures and flavors, aromas, all those things. If you took all those things and started folding that together, you could write something that relates a theme, that builds upon those experiences. That's what I think. That's my interpretation. And Wendy, if you're listening, you can always pop in on the comments or something and correct me in how wrong I am. But to me, there can be a story there if you find the through line of the whole event. If you can find the theme that you're building on, then really the cooking becomes just sort of a metaphor for that. You could do the same thing. Like, I travel a lot, and Kara and I spent a lot of time on the road, doing van life and RV life. I've traveled the world. I've traveled the United States. And there are themes I think I could pick up on there. One of them was something I was thinking about while on a walk yesterday. So I would fold that in as well. But, occasionally what I will do is I will take a little drive. There's a town nearby called Georgetown, Texas. It has a beautiful town square. It's a very sort of small town feel, but there's been so much growth around it. And they've done so much to kind of keep the heritage of that town alive, and to do some things. There's historic preservation and everything is happening, but it's a beautiful area. And I'm taking these long walks every day, sometimes through my neighborhood, but sometimes I'll go to places like Georgetown and I'll walk in the evening around Georgetown. I'm getting my exercise, but I'm also experiencing that atmosphere and all these people who are there to browse, to shop, to have dinner, to stop in for coffee, to look at art exhibits. There's art and museums and things around that square. And so I could see writing a memoir where I'm exploring the theme of being an outsider on the very edge of all this activity. It's one of my sort of favorite experiences. And I experienced it a lot as we traveled the U.S. and the world. When I've gone to conferences, for example, where I'm going to speak at a conference, I find myself in strange cities a lot. One of my favorite things is just to take a walk, and especially in the evenings, into areas where everybody's gathered, especially families. I love when I'm around a whole bunch of families. This is one of the reasons why I always love going to Disney Springs in Orlando, or just hanging out. One of my favorite things about Disney is to just hang out in the restaurants and lobbies of the resorts, being on site, not a guest. I'm not staying there, but I'm just kind of there on the outside, and I'm listening and I'm watching, and I learn so much about humanity through that experience. So there's a part of me that really loves the idea of being an outsider. Not cast out, it's not a negative thing. It's sort of an exploration of the positive side of being on the outside looking in. I love to take walks in the evening in my neighborhood, and there's just something about walking past these homes where, that warm glow is coming from inside. They still got their shades and blinds open, and so you get a little glimpse, sort of voyeuristic view of these people's homes and their lives as they're, sometimes they're sitting down to dinner. More often it's, they're playing a video game, or they're, maybe they're cooking a meal, or maybe they're just someone's sitting at a desk. I like to think they're all writing, but maybe they're just, watching YouTube or something. So there's a theme, right? So if I write a memoir, I'm thinking I might go in that direction. You may have just heard me outline some of the memoir I may choose to write, but all of that can be strung together with my experiences with traveling, my experiences with just taking evening and morning walks, with my experiences with going to author conferences. There's a theme there that can tie all that together. And so as a memoirist, my job is to find the story, find the thread, and, write that plot, basically. So that's my understanding of it. Wendy Dale can probably describe it all much better than me. I'd love to actually hear, if you're listening, Wendy, I'd love to hear your take on my potential memoir topic. And you too, whoever's watching or listening, if you want to just kind of weigh in, I'd love to hear what you're feeling or thinking about that. There is something fascinating about the mundane, though, to me. It's I mean, if it's too mundane, if you're not bothering to find sort of the magic in that mundanity, then you lose me as a reader or a viewer. So you probably lose everyone else. But one of the things that fascinates me is this notion that even the most mundane things can contain that magic. There was a meme. Someone shared I don't know if you'd call this a meme, but they shared this thing on Facebook, and it was like a picture of Bob Barker on The Price is Right, a package of saltine crackers, a can of chicken soup, and there was like one other thing. So it was a can of ginger ale, and in my household it would have been Sprite. But the gist of it was that they said this was the stay home from school sick starter pack. And what fascinated me about that was I knew exactly what it was saying and exactly what it meant. I shared that meme and said, it's kind of comforting that to realize and to learn that I was not the only one who experienced this, and other people felt it was comforting too. And this is about being sick and staying home from school, largely during like the 80s and 90s, but like the most boring thing you could possibly think of as a kid when you're having to go through it, like laying on a couch wrapped in an Afghan, having to drink, a bowl of chicken noodle soup, eating it with saltine crackers. This is the only food that your body can keep down right now. And you're watching, of all things, The Price is Right while sipping your Sprite or ginger ale. And almost all of us in the Western world have experienced something like that. How bizarre is that, right? So there's the commonality in a mundane story, and that's what makes it magical. And I think that's kind of what I love about memoir. So now, as a writer of other forms of literature, if you're a fiction writer, a novelist, keep this stuff in mind for that as well, because there's it's not always about flowery language or being literary in your writing. It's all about finding the notes that we all recognize in ourselves. That's what you're trying to do as a storyteller. So if you are struggling to find a way to make your prose pop, if you're trying to find a way to make your writing stand out and have that feeling, that sort of grab hold, magical feeling, then it may come down to trying to find those commonalities and share them. Memoir writing does this, I think, as its sort of mainstay, but all writing should do this. All good writing, especially fiction, but all writing, really. If you are, if as a copywriter, this is what I leaned on for my bread and butter. I needed to find I needed to find the things that were instantly recognizable, the things that hit the note within the reader that resonated, so that they could connect whatever that subconscious good feeling was with whatever I was trying to sell, with the product I was marketing. Sometimes you get pretty lucky with that sort of thing, and imagery is really easy, and sometimes it's a little more challenging, and you got to work at it a little and sort of like come at it from a different angle. But I think, honestly, I don't care if you're writing a textbook or a history book, or you're writing a novel or short story. I think that if you really want to engage a reader and keep them on the hook until the end, that's how you do it. If you want someone to read whatever it is you wrote and come away saying that was good, that was excellent, even if the point of it was to teach them how to tie knots on sailing boats, or or to do leather crafting, or to program their VCR from the early 90s, whatever it is that you're trying to convey to the reader, you're going to have a lot more success, and you're going to have a lot more, you're going to generate a lot more satisfaction if you're focused on finding the commonalities and the human story that's in that. And that's pretty much all I had to say on that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm glad that you stuck around for this. I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this, let me know. And I've got there's a lot of things like this that I think I want to explore and discuss in the future, but we got some more great guests coming up for you for the Wordslinger podcast. So thanks for tuning in and subscribing. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment, do all the things that I am obligated by international YouTube and podcasting law to ask you to do. Make sure you do all those things. Particularly share this with people, because I'm trying to build an audience here, and a bigger audience here. I'm trying to do something with this. And I've already done something with it, and I'm pretty proud of the Wordslinger podcast for all it's been over the past decade. But I'm trying to kind of take it to new levels, I think. And I'm exploring what that means. So you can be a part of that, and you're the biggest and best part of it, in my opinion. So thank you for being here. Beyond that, it's been great chatting with you. Hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead, a wonderful lifetime ahead. Depending on when you listen to this, bless you no matter where you are. Thank you again for being here with me. I'll see you next time.
Wordslinger.